Suspense. Okay, so this first one, that's always intimidating, isn't it? We're probably going to do a terrible job of, but the general principle of getting into programming for competition, working forwards, working backwards, common questions that come up and so on. With the stuff that people prepped, has anyone got something that they like immediately had a question or had a topic they wanted to get into?
I have a question.
Jump straight into that.
What do other coaches do when an athlete can't fit in all of their sessions? Like it's a last minute, I can't fit in all my sessions. Say they train 4 times a week and they can only do 3 that week. They're like mid-block. What do other people do?
Anyone jump in on that?
I mean, I've done this a couple of times with people, and because it's been very, very last minute, I have taken what I would consider to be the priority work that I want them to get done. And I've had to put it into their 3rd day session, bearing in mind things like, fatigue, etc., so it doesn't affect the other work. But yeah, because it was literally very last minute, I was like, what do they need to get done? What would I prefer them to get done? And I've just reorganized the week for them at the last minute. That's all I had to do.
I think the easiest one normally is to address, like, obviously when we set primary, secondary and tertiary sessions and so on, and then literally working down that chain. What is the lowest contributor to it? Now, sometimes obviously if they're on like 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes that's just on the idea of spacing the program. So if someone's on 5 day a week, that compression's very easy because you could literally they'll probably have like a session that's only squat or only deadlift, and then compressing that into one of the other sessions to make sure that that frequency is still maintained, and maybe an adjustment to the volume or intensity tends to be my first port of call. It's harder if someone's on like 3. I've actually had that with numerous lifters, and 2 lifters over the last month where they've gone from 3 and been like, I only have time for 2. Like, anything we do is a hit. Like, something's gonna give. Secondary deadlift would be out the window if they had it. Neither of them do. Secondary squat tries to maintain, and then trying to get two bench sessions, and more like spread those 2 sessions out in the week, but scheduling dependent. What about, very quickly, do we let him in?
What did he say in the coach's chat?
Late. Right. So, Beck, your principle, like if you had someone on 4 days a week, what would be your adjustment to get them down to the 3 if they needed it?
And they just need it for that 1 week. It's, the first thought, my initial thing is like, I'd probably just miss a session. I'd choose the session. I'd be like, right, you probably don't need to do this one, or we can afford to miss that one. Don't do it, and I'll just have it repeat for next week. But then there is also the idea of like, you can just compress sessions. So they're doing 4, you're going in down to 3. It's like, right, well, maybe we could take some accessories out of one of them and put the primary work in from that 4th session if we needed it. Like, I don't think it's that deep sometimes, just for 1 week as well. Like, zoom out, look at the big picture of a year. Oh no, I missed 1 session. Oh dear.
Not the end of the world. I suppose that like gets more interesting if they're closer to competition. So like if it's final block of prep. Again, like the compression's not too bad, but what if it's so one of the things I had, which I actually found interesting, is so if you've got someone on 4 days a week, but normally they train, let's say Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and now they can't train till Wednesday. Do you go, let's do less sessions and you voluntarily remove the session, as opposed to let's just get them in back to back and potentially start knocking on too far forward?
I'd probably ask if they can do other days. Like if you're saying they do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but now they can't train till Wednesday, can they do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday? And there's just a smaller gap between Saturday and Monday the next week where they can get back on track, and you just adjust for that slightly in the programming. Maybe pull back on something for the Saturday if we can, or maybe anticipate greater fatigue on the Monday.
Had a really nice straightforward one with Jacqueline, who's prepping for Euros, and she's just done her first block. We have 2 to go, and she had to start her training on a Tuesday. And so at the end of the first block, we were like, we can now start training on Monday, which lines up better with comp, gives me more opportunity for data. So at the end of the first block, we basically, like where it would have started here, second block's going to start here. That spacing at the end, the secondary deadlift and the secondary squats, soft tapered to allow the beginning of the next block to start on the Monday. Because as you say, exactly that. Saturday, running a bit softer, Sunday off, back on Monday with diminished expectations at the start of the block. way more nuanced than I expected on that. One of the big things that I wanted to get into is how big a decision difference do people make if, let's say, you're 3 blocks out, 12 weeks, well, assuming 4-week blocks, you're 12 weeks out from competition. How much do you plan backwards versus immediately start working forwards?
So I looked at this like in terms of how experienced I am as a coach, because I think it is something that very much comes with experience. You get used to planning forwards when you're a newer coach. So with my athletes that I've been working with for a while, I tend to leave it till, say, Scott's going into comp, he's got a few weeks left here. It was quite a late entry, but the last sort of like maybe 6 weeks, I can start to I tend to know what he'll start to hit and things like that as well. So for me, it's a little bit later out, but it's definitely a skill that I've acquired through doing more programming. It's something that I would not have approached at all as a new coach.
Ryan, what about yourself?
It depends on how long I've been working with an athlete. If I've been
Let's say they've joined at it, to clarify. So they've joined and they're 3 months out.
Okay. So if they've joined, it's definitely more of a forward approach, with the idea that I have a backwards approach already pre-written. So I'm a visual person, so I like to pre-write stuff with the idea that, right, okay, this is the general idea as to how I predict this block is going to go. But I don't fall on it. Like, I have that as an idea, I have that as the general concept, but I'll definitely go with the forward approach and allow that to guide the process. And it'll be interesting to compare, right, okay, this is why I thought first and foremost, how well does it compare at the end to what we ended with, if that makes sense.
Beck, what about yourself? Because I feel so far I'm slightly different to what the takes are. Are you similar?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit in between. So the more experienced you are as a coach, the better idea you're going to have with starting someone off with, okay, we're 12 weeks out. You've come to me, you're going to want a result that's going to increase retention. You're going to stay, you're going to be happier. What's my experience of generally provides a result? So that's like, so I will have a 12-week plan roughly. I've got like maybe a base one. I'm sure it'll change over time, but like this will get you a result. Let's get you more specific. But that base idea came from practice with many people. And then similar to Ryan's point of view is that idea gets altered per person. So like if I've got an existing client who's an existing athlete who is doing like their 5th comp, I've been there for 2 years or whatever, I've got now a good idea of what their 12 weeks will probably look like. But it's with like the 12-week plan, it's flexible. Like there's no set weights. There's like RPEs. I want it to be this difficult roughly, because there's all the things we just spoke about. Where what if on week 3 they have to miss a session? Like, you didn't plan for that initially. So yeah, there's those aspects to think about. But even in the pre-writing, I get less exact the closer to comp it is. So like I'll have a good idea of what the first block should be, and then I'll maybe write the exercises that I want for the next one. I may write the reps for the primary, like the SBD work, but outside of that, it depends on what we've just done in the previous block.
To go hand in hand with that, one of the massive factors is going to be how poor was their programming or movement quality before they started, because that gives you the like, oh, I can get results with a really minimalistic approach here. And I think the programming gets almost more complex if they're very, very skilled when they start. Like that programming, you're going to try to get a bit more out of. If they've been doing it for a really long time, then it should be somewhat more regimented. Whereas someone who's like absolute beginner, you could run that as 2 6-week blocks and still have, or like even run one block substantially harsher, extend it to the 5 weeks, try and push the intensity and still get more out of that time, and then have a shorter peak and still see progression. I think there's a lot more flexibility in it. The more early in someone's lifting career they are, the poorer the programming that they already had. If they've had good, for instance, if one of Beck's clients came to me and said, I've got 3 months, I'd be like, it's going to be very hard to see good progress because the programming's already good and the movement you'll assume is already good. But if someone comes over and it's like, they don't even know how to deadlift, I can fix that in 4 weeks, run 2 weeks of like simple prep, and should definitely see a result. So I think it kind of plays into what's the level of athlete you've been given. I think that the only issue with 12 weeks is like you don't really have scope to run anything longer or shorter. So if someone's programming, let's say they join with you and you're on week 2, they've overshot everything, they've shit the bed. It's now really hard to build that programming. So I think the big thing for me on that short time span is like how conservatively I start with. So that first week, even if it's like, let's say we anticipated it's going to be a top set of 3, I'm probably going to start that on slightly higher volume for space to see how much of an error they make. And then I can start setting brackets and stuff pretty early. Alice, what about yourself? Anything different to any of this?
I feel like I do forwards and backwards programming. Like I feel like I do, like I know what I want to do those last few weeks before comp, but because they're brand new to me, I feel like I'd have to get them to a point where I could get them to meet that place where I need them to be. Obviously, because I don't know them that well. Obviously, yeah, just like movement variations and things, just to see where their training's at and how their lifts are looking, and then just find a point where I can get them to be where I need them to be before we go into the peak weeks, really.
So you're almost doing 4 weeks of forward loading and then working your way backwards from 8 weeks out or something like that.
Yeah, but I don't know whether I should be doing that, but visually that's how I would describe how I do it if I had someone new who had 12 weeks out. I've never had that though. I've had someone new who's like 3 weeks out, or just new people who haven't booked a comp yet.
Well,
go on.
It makes sense because you're using that time to learn about the lifter. It's not a great amount of time, but it's enough for you to somewhat understand where their thresholds are. How much volume can they take on? What's their intensity ranges like? What amounts of error are they showcasing within their training? And then you can go backwards from there in the last 8 weeks, right? Okay, I kind of know how he works. I can work with that and work my way backwards.
Because I think with most people, we're kind of assuming you fall within a bell curve. There's basic assumptions we can make. The big thing that you kind of, I think people almost wouldn't be comfortable to admit is that if it's 3 weeks, 3 blocks, 3 months, then it's mostly assumption. And you're just working within what's the minimal impact I can have to this to go in a positive direction. But it's not the most efficient programming. And this takes me into my next question, which actually is something that over the last 2 weeks, I've had so many discussions about, which is experimental phases of training. So the opportunity to go, right, full shift, change squat stance, change shoes, or change your bench setup, change from conventional to sumo. Realistically, and I really want to know like people's opinions on timeframes and so on, is like to make a substantial change, there's a couple of things. One, you are assuming with some reasoning that that's going to be an improvement. How long do you let that run for before you assume that that's working? How long would you give it to check that time frame? Be like, right, 1 month, 2 month, 3 blocks, and then how many nuance changes to that? So, for instance, you say we're going to move you to sumo, but we do the first block and we go, actually, the protocol might have been the problem, and then we change the protocol, and then maybe sumo seems like it's the problem. So, how long do you give to being experimental? At what point do you decide to be experimental? Because when you get into, you have lifters with very nuanced approaches that really suits them. That didn't happen because you kept making assumptions. At some point, you had to experiment. I'll go there.
Oh God! Right, we all spoke up once. That was crazy. I'll go first. So, I think how long do you give it is dictated to me by how long do you have. So if someone comes to you brand new, or like brand new to me, let's say that they've at least lifted and chosen some lifting stances, chosen some grip widths, right? If they're like, I'm not going to compete for a year, I have a year to fuck around and find out with them. Like, in terms of how long do I know if it's working or not, you're going to need a good set of data points. So like, make minimal changes block to block. One block is like, look, you use the deadlift twice a week. We're going to keep the protocol the same, and we're going to change one of them for sumo. Right? The only thing we've changed is we're now doing sumo. So we can tell if sumo is a problem or if the protocol is a problem. Maybe the protocol doesn't work for sumo. Okay, let's try it again in the next block. Let's have it like always start it with the secondary day. This is how I try and approach it. And then I'm like, these two numbers, your estimated max for your conventional and your sumo, they're kind of close together. But I gave you paused sumos. So, you know, and you've got normal like conventional deadlifts. So I think sumo might be good for you. So let's make that your primary day, put conventional on your secondary. See what we can push out of this, see if it's just fucking game changing, right? Because I do have someone like that at the moment that he'd only ever done conventional. And I was like, let's just try sumo. You've never done it. You don't have any comps in the horizon. Let's try it. Put it as your secondary day. I think we've run it for like 2 or 3 blocks down there. He got used to the movement. Then it started picking up momentum. I'm like, right, let's put it to your primary day. See where we can push this. See if we can get it higher than your conventional, which doesn't seem to have moved as much. And yeah, currently we're now running that as his primary. And if you're looking at skill, my approach is always like lower reps, higher sets, because then you're practicing the skill of doing the movement rather than having fatigue set in and you're practicing bad habits of, yeah, but you know, my core gave out. I'm not bracing properly.
Because one of the exact examples of this where I got caught kind of at a precipice of being like, I have to make a choice now, was Amelia, where we were running like through her prep and being like, we're going to exactly that process. We brought in sumo as a secondary. Sumo ran pretty well. Conventional soft ran both protocols somewhat similar to see how different they were. And in anything of moderate volume, lower intensity, sumo was just absolutely destroying conventional. So we made it primary and we pushed it up. And then as soon as it hit any relevant load at a lower RP, a lower rep range, it didn't convert anymore. And when we had the same principle with her conventional, it was converting better. And so we found this kind of midpoint where we're like, sumo is really consistent until it needs to be good, and deadlift is your conventional is inconsistent until it needs to be good. And we literally hit this line of being like, comp's too close to keep fucking around. We have to pick. At that point, like, and again, Becca, I apologize, I'm asking you specifically just because I think we share a similar opinion here. You have both. You take, let's just a prime example. You take them both to an RP8, but sumo's been better the entire season. RP8 double, conventionals better marginally. How do you then make a decision?
I would make the decision on what's the level of competition that you're going into.
Highest
because
she has.
So like nationals, right? Because if it's a low level comp, you try sumo. Because think about how long they have been doing conventional for. Like years. How long have they been doing sumo? A few months. Like maybe half a year. It almost is like obvious that conventional will still eke out that little bit higher compared to sumo, because when you're practicing the skill of a movement, it's not just, is the movement correct? Are you doing it right? The skill of lifting heavy is different to the skill of lifting light weights for reps. So their skill of doing conventional heavy is higher. That's the other nuanced thing to look at, is that's already higher. I expect it to be better. The fact that sumo is anywhere close to it, you can probably sit there and think, right, at nationals, right, we're going to get a better result from conventional. We're still going to do it at nationals. But afterwards, improving your ability to pull sumo slowly is possibly worth playing with, because in like next year, 2 years time, sumo could be the thing that gets you an extra 5-10 kilos, and that's what gets you the difference between like first and last.
It's exactly the decision we made, which is really satisfying, because if you'd said the other way, I'll be like, I'm just going to go message Amelia. But the other thing that came into it is we were saying like, okay, through prep, what's the soft amount of sumo we can maintain in the programming, just to make sure that when it come back to it, it's now not foreign, and post Nats obviously bringing it back in. And then obviously it's what's the impact on squat? Because that was the big factor that kind of kept it there. Any high dosage conventional destroyed her squat. Moderate dosage of sumo, absolutely flying. I know that me and Beck have just dominated that one. So same question, but Alice, because you just had this with Bri, right?
Yeah, so we introduced sumo a few blocks ago, and I've just kept it as her secondary day, but it took a little while to sort of get used to it, as I guess it does for most people transitioning to sumo. Like we had some like tight hips and things, but we've sort of found our groove with it, and our E1RM for our conventional, our sumo is pretty similar now, and her sumo is looking much smoother than her conventional is. Like, it just looks more comfortable now, to be honest. So she's competing in Feb on the 16th, just a regional, BDFBA. Not sure if she's wanting to qualify for nationals, and we have just made the decision that we will likely be doing sumo for her comp. But I've decided to, because I feel like it's really, really close, I've decided to keep her sumo on her day 4 and her conventional on her day 2, rather like swapping it round, but sort of keeping conventional in a bit softer now as we move into prep. And I said to her, let's go in with sumo, but like, should anything change, because we haven't really pushed singles or anything on our sumo yet, because I wasn't expecting this to happen. Yeah, basically she can change her mind. So I'm running soft singles for her conventional, and then sort of like what I'd expect to be her prep singles for her sumo. But yeah, we're just sort of communicating each week on how things are feeling. But it does look like it's going to be sumo that she ends up pulling on comp day. But I think it will be how it goes on the day, because we really haven't pushed them.
See what the payoff is like.
Yeah.
Actually just made a reel about this and transitioning Cleo from conventional to sumo on the same principle. But as we're just pounding one topic, within the bits that you wrote down, Ryan, what did you have as other topics you wanted to go through, or specific questions?
So I think issues that arise with powerlift with programming, I should say, is we talk about this transition period where we transition from conventional to sumo, sumo to conventional, wider stance squat, narrow stance squat, high bar, low bar. At what point do we kind of step away from the principles of?
I feel like this question is really hurting you to ask.
It is.
Like, there's real suffering.
I've written it down and it doesn't make sense because I've scribbled it.
Ask it wrong and then we'll figure out the question.
At what point do you realize that what you've changed isn't the right move?
Was a mistake.
Yeah.
I actually think this is like on the same tier of what we're discussing, but it is a good question of being like, how long do you ride something before you're like, this is definitely the problem? Like, how many data points do you need? Beck seems like this question killed him.
It killed me as well. It was so simple.
Yeah, okay. So like, at what point do you decide it's the problem, as opposed to like, maybe it's just the protocol, making small changes? So let's just say you've added secondary day as high bar work and being like, we're assuming it will be this, and the end of the block being like, it could have been the amount of volume, maybe it was the intensity. How long do you give that to? Similar sort of question, right?
I'd give my answer similar to what I would have said to your previous question, Callum, which is 2 to 3 blocks, because I feel like, one block and it might not be working, but like 1 or 2 or 3 like minor adjustments to this change, to give it a fair shot, and that's when I decide whether it's working or not.
Yeah, I've come across this recently, and it's quite annoying because you go in with the assumption of this is going to be good, and it's just the complete opposite, and I'm like, oh shit, that was not good at all. And you make the minor adjustments, as you said. Is it a technical issue? Is it a programming issue? You go through each avenue and go, crap, it's not that. I just need to fall back and change the whole protocol, whole principle. Yeah,
I feel like what Beck said as well about how much time the lifter actually has.
Yeah.
Like, there's a comp on the horizon, or if they literally don't even have one in the diary, like it does depend on how much time you have to play with as well.
Yeah,
I think as well, the bit just after that is probably one of the term's wrong, but the scariest bit of coaching, of where, let's just say there's something happening with the squat breakdown, and you're like, I'm certain high bar work is going to reinforce this, or pause squat, whatever. You pick a protocol, you apply the protocol, it doesn't work. That next decision now gets quite intimidating, of being like, we're cutting into the time that we had. So say they were 4 months out. First month, you're like, I can resolve that problem with this bit of programming. That seems golden. And it doesn't resolve at all. And you start the next adjustment and it's not resolving. And now being like, this is not playing out how I anticipated. I don't actually think I have an example of this, but I can that bit of decision making now becomes much more finite. I think that's very on communication with the athlete as well.
At that point, I mean, I've experienced it where I've gone, right, this is what I think is going to work, and then that hasn't worked, and I'm like, oh, it's fine because I'll put this in. That was my second idea, and then it hasn't worked. I'm like, oh crap. That's usually when I go back to looking at the programming itself, the intensity and stuff like that, and working backwards that way, because I'm just like, how long do I keep changing movement constraints and keep making adjustments to the movement itself before I actually start to address the programming? So I tend to give it a couple of shots within movement constraints and adjustments before I think actually maybe it is the programming. Review old programming the last time something worked in our favor, and just try, even though I hate rinsing and repeating too much, because for the athlete starts to get bored, it starts to get tedious. If it worked, it worked, and then if I run that again, it usually works.
Actually, on that, and again, like Becca, seems like I'm just highlighting you, but it's because I think we had a similar conversation to this before. I can't remember what we came to. Let's say you have like you run a block. You're not near competition, at least 6 months out, and you run a block and you go, that's been quite successful. Beginning to end of block, very good results across the board. Would you clean, rinse, and repeat the entire block as is, no changes?
Not straight away. I would kind of keep it in the bank and maybe pull it out if I need to, like potentially if I'm in a situation as Cheryl was describing where you make a change, didn't work, make another change, didn't have the intended effect. It's like we need to start building some momentum again. I'm going to have a look at what did work. I'm going to pick out things about it that I'm also going to try and work out why it worked. That's the other thing, is we had a good block. I'm not just there like, oh sweet, we had a good block, right, let's go on to the next thing. Like, why was that so good? So Connor Byrne, I had an experimental phase after his last comp where we started doing higher volume on his squat. So initially it was lower volume, as in skill development, so sets of like 3, maybe 4. And then I was just like, after a comp, I was like, oh fuck it, let's really piss him off, give him like 5s and 7s, right? His squat just blew the fuck up. I was just like, how are you now doing for 5 at an RPE 6 what you did for 3 the week before comp? So I was like, the only thing I've already done is I gave him more volume. I was like, well, we're running with that. Like,
I was going to say, so the following block, are you going like, would your bias lean towards more, less, or the same?
So I started with 5s, I think. So I was like, what if we did 6s? Is volume the key? Is less specificity what's going to help you do better? So yeah, I would have this principle of 5s worked, right? What does 6 do? The same. Okay, so 6 still works. What does 7 do? All right, 7 didn't really do what I wanted. Okay, let's bring it back down to 5, because that worked. Okay, now what about 4? Right, and then just play with it that way. So
and if
similar.
Let's say you saw a really positive response on that, would you then be more willing to run it closer to competition just because it's holding up as well, or would you still feel that you should pull it back?
No, that's exactly what I did in his last comp. Is we did work in sets of 5 in the block of his comp and his taper and everything, because it seems like that's what grew his squat. So the top set work was still like 3s, 2s, singles and stuff going in, like the blocks going into it. But his working sets were 5s, and I think he put, I don't remember, I think it was like 12 kilo on his squat. So
shit. Oh yeah, I saw that, and it was some in the tank, right?
Yeah. So I was happy with that. That's clearly working. So I guess bouncing back to our first conversation of how do we prep people for comps and like what's the plan? Well, for Connor, it's now going to be, we're going to do probably sets of 5, maybe 4s going into that comp. But for a new person, that's not the first thing I'm going to give them.
I think the proximity to competition is the interesting one of like, at what point we feel our bias pulls us away from the decision that we're already making of being like, this is working well. Where do I assume that it's probably not going to pay off? Whereas being like, I know there's a lot of coaching where it's like, this works. I've seen I think it was Nico Flores we spoke about before. They were like, triples are converting better, so we're just going to run triples. And into comp, they ran one single and triples, best squat he's ever had. And it was just like, we're just going to assume this will maintain. At what point it's just like, I feel like we should be doing more practice of singles, unless you have that data. Like if you have data from previous competitions, it's much easier to pick. But if it's the first comp and being like, I feel like we have, even if that block prior ran doubles or triples, whatever, and that was really positive, that bias still feels like I have to revert to the singles.
Yeah, I'd agree if it's your first one with someone, because it also sounds like you wouldn't have done the singles with them. So you don't know it won't work. You just know that the other thing really did work. So again, like you think about what does the comp mean to them? If it's their first comp, it's like, look, let's just have fun, see what happens. And then you can work on this stuff afterwards and figure things out.
Yeah.
I do have a question for Cum though.
Yeah, please, because he's not spoken yet.
Yeah, he's like, why am I even on the call? So I guess, and you can take any of the topics we've spoken about, but how much of the athlete's opinion do you take into consideration when making changes to the program? So I'm going to give an example of the sumo conventional conversation. You're sat there, you're like, I'm pretty sure sumo is going to be better for you. And their reaction is, I'm not pulling sumo. That's a meme lift. It should be banned from the IPF. Like, but the data is suggesting they're going to pull better on sumo. So, you know, how do you deal with that?
I would ask for a legit reason why, not just a meme lift. Like, what is your reasoning behind it?
I'm the athlete. I don't want to do it.
You're doing it.
Okay, I'll just be a new coach.
And just like that, Beck's no longer coached by Cum.
Yeah, that sucks.
I think depending on the data points, like if we don't have enough that it's convincing, I think we could run both simultaneously until we have enough data points where I can prove like, yeah, sumo's gonna be the one. To answer your question, if it comes down to it and they're very similar, I think I would lean towards the one that they're comfortable with, because that's just the one they're gonna probably execute better day off.
Everyone else want to weigh in on this?
I might do similar, but give them both examples and be like, these are the outcomes that I am predicting. Obviously, I want you to be happy and comfortable within the comp. Are you happy that this may be the situation if you choose not to pull sumo?
That comes back to what Beck was saying earlier, like what the level of competition is, but also what's the buy-in of the athlete, where they're like, I want to be the best there ever is. And like, you will do that being sumo. And like, I want to pull conventional because it's a meme lift. I'm like, okay, well then come second. Like, I don't care. Like, if that's what you're saying you want. So it really does depend. Like, if you've got someone who's early beginner, intermediate, they're not shooting for QT or anything, they're like, I don't want to do sumo because it doesn't matter. I'm like, okay, well, just understanding you had more potential there. If this is what you want to do, like, we'll do this. But I think there would, at a certain level, there'd be an accountability of like, please don't act like a child. You told me this is the result you want. This is how you'd get there.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on who as to whether or not I'd be willing to do the fight of being like, you being an idiot. What did you do?
Give the way up of like, do you want the total you want or not? If you have the data to predict the numbers that they could pull.
That's harder when you've got no data as well, being like, you look better suited to sumo. And I'm not doing it, being like, okay.
Can't force them.
What about as a general? So like, let's take that as a general one of how much you take the lifter's opinion into account. What opinions do we think are not just relevant, but somewhat vital to programming?
Like if they're bored of their accessories, and I don't know if you can tell if they're skipping them.
And definitely see repeat numbers week on week being like, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
What else? Come on, relevant information that we look for from athletes. This is definitely one we should all have answers to.
Just in terms of programming.
Yeah.
I've had athletes actually ask me if they can try certain variations of lifts because they would like to try them. Just for variety within the program as well. They just like, want to try them or want to try something different. So in that scenario, it's a case of reviewing the block goal and saying, this is how it may impact your goal. does that matter to you? Because if they're just saying, I really want to mix it up with my training, I'm really struggling to go at the moment to get into the mindset, that is the priority for me a lot of the time. If they're not in prep or anything like that, I want them to enjoy their training and I want them to go. So I'm like, okay, you may have a regression with some things, you may see your goals change slightly. Is that really important to you? No, I just really want to try this. Okay, we'll put it in there.
I think obviously some of the obvious big ones: discomfort, pain, massive. Like if someone's like high bars suitable and they're like, it really makes my knees ache, I'm like, well, I'm probably not going to write that as a decision, assuming I've made you warm up properly and I've checked whether or not it's your execution. Actual pain, obviously not like a let's get rid of it, but a potential regression or just checking on where that's coming from. Immediate change. How someone feels of like, I do think that if someone feels really bored or not excited to do a movement, let's say you think you might have a plan B. Let's say it's as simple as low distribution, like as they're hitting the bottom of a squat, they're shifting forwards or back. You thought you could do paused or you thought you could do tempo. At what point would you be like, you're 2 weeks into doing one of those two? If they were giving you, I'm really bored of this, I'm not excited to do this, I hate this. At what point would you be like, let's try the alternative? Right out the block? Or if it seems they're really getting pissed about it, what point are you changing?
I normally make them finish a block.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going the same. And like, if you can't handle 2 weeks of a thing you don't enjoy, we're gonna have a really difficult couple of years in powerlifting.
Yeah, I would go with a very polite way of basically saying you're only 2 weeks in. If you're giving up on this already, you haven't given it enough time to know.
Yeah.
What about pain? Let's say a variant flares pain. At what point, like what sort of immediate changes would people make? Like flat out none, and just checking, like I need videos next time, I need review, I need in session messaging, or would you make immediate changes? This is probably quite a it depends question.
Are we talking about, when we're talking about pain, are we talking about they have sudden and intense pain, or are they telling us it's pain and we don't know if it's pain?
They just said it hurts when I do it.
Have they told us during their session?
After.
Then I'd make them do it again, just with less weight, and tell me when it hurts, and actually message me mid-session next time and actually send a video. You can't really do a lot without seeing it. We're online coaches. We're not in their bodies.
What a way to phrase that.
Oh, yeah, we're recording.
Beck, what about you? Same thing. You get a message, someone's like shoulder pain while doing 3 count pause bench work, for instance. There's such a specific example.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So at what point, like, is it at the, like, you don't need to give me the answer, right?
Yeah.
Just these are the things I'd ask is like, where's the pain coming from? Shoulder. Okay. What point of the lift? Right. I'm thinking like, why would that be? Hopefully I've got an idea of what their bench looks like. So I could be like, oh, you know, they've got really flared elbows. Maybe they've got some impingement in the shoulder. I could be like, try and cue them out of it. It's one option. Ideally, yeah, we want videos. I'd have a discussion with them. If they do message during the session, I'm like, okay, maybe lower the weight. Oh, no, it still hurts. All right, just sack it off, chill out. There's something not recovering. Like, if something hurts, it's probably not recovered. Is the programming the problem? Is it like just because pains occurred for their tempo bench in their shoulder, that doesn't mean that I've not given them too much overhead press. It doesn't mean that something that they did last week, how's their sleep, how's their food, like all this kind of stuff. So it depends, but yeah, I'll probably make them do it again, see if we can recreate the pain or see if it sorts itself out.
I think like the bench is a really good one for it, because obviously, like, let's say day 2 they get shoulder pain and you're like probably going to be positional. Like there's probably something in that. That means that on average there's 3, maybe 4 bench sessions being like, I want you to try this in the next bench session. If no pain, on the assumption that it wasn't externals or recovery that was playing into it, we know it was probably positional. Come back to that session, now no pain. So I think sometimes it depends, what are my opportunities as well before we do something like that or that session again. Like if they deadlift once a week, deadlift causes pain. The next time they deadlift, I have one opportunity before we've got 2 weeks off of deadlifting, and it's a bit more difficult to start to apply changes. If they've got secondary sessions of things, that's more opportunities for me to try to cue a fix, assuming it's skill based. If it's recovery, then obviously maybe fucking sleep and eat, he says. What else? We've got big topics we're covering. I know I'm bringing us into like little nuanced examples, but
One of my questions was about when athletes become bored, but I put, do others prompt video analysis requests within the program?
Yes.
Don't know, like if you're like, you saw their lift on Instagram or something and you just like leave them a little message, or would you like reply to their story? Or
I reply to the story. There are times where someone's like, just smash this at this RPE. I'm like, please post this for analysis. And you know there's a moment they've gone, fuck.
yeah, see, I just don't think I could do that.
I think you could probably just message being like, put it on the program being like, make sure you submit this one for analysis. The problem is if they've already done the session, there's no real, like, you could say it nicely, obviously, but there's no way without clearly making a point of being like, the one you just did, can you send me that so I can do a proper review for you? And they're going to know that you are effectively about to make points about the lift. Doesn't mean that you're shitting on it, but that one I think is the harshest when you see something on a story and being like, that's not what I said. That's not even close. And now you have to chase them for it. They're awkward.
I'd put it on the programming. I'll see something within the programming that doesn't look quite right. So rather than messaging them immediately and being like, what's this? Because I don't want to get into a conversation about it. I'll be like, can you send this to me for review, please? Or if I've made a really hard or something like that, and I'm not sure how that will run, I want to know immediately. So immediately I will say, please send this to me straight away because I want to see it right away.
Do people do it on accessories often?
No.
Not
Yeah.
often, but I have.
Beck, do you?
Yeah, not often. I don't assume because honestly, most accessories it's kind of hard to get wrong. Like you're in a machine, you're attached to some cables, like it only moves one way. But if they message me like, "Oh, this hurts," and I'm like, "That probably shouldn't hurt. Let me see it." Or I don't really feel it in XYZ. It's not achieving what I think it should. Or if the weights, like if I've got an idea of what the weight should be, say it's like a split squat, and I'm like, look, at best it's going to be 52% of what I expect them to do in a squat. At worst, anything below that, right? And if they're doing like 60%, 80% of what they can squat it for, I'm like, what are you doing? Like if I see something abnormal. So
I've seen this on a barbell RDL where someone had their deadlifts. They dropped 5 kilos and did sets of 10 on an RDL. And I was just like, show me.
Yeah.
Touch and go deadlift, like bouncing off the floor. And I'm like, well, that's not quite what we're after.
well, yeah,
abnormalities.
if someone posts on their story but they're not posting for analysis, I am just like, can you just please, or I will analyze it there. I'll be like, hey, we're just looking for this because it's not happening.
What else within that? Kun, did you have any specific questions? I'm very aware we have not asked you many things directly.
No, I was just saying with that previous one, I typically ask if they're undershooting. Like I've had one athlete that could deadlift 200 kilos and he does an RDL for 85 kilos. Like you can 100% do much more.
When there's a massive disparity in a movement of being like,
Yes.
45. In fact, I literally had this conversation with someone today that were like, oh yeah, I do my RDLs like 60, 70 kilos, 300 kilo deadlifter. And I was been like, why are we doing this? Like, also doesn't fill in the program properly. Trust me, if I'd seen it, I'd fucking said something. But being like, you're doing 60 kilo RDLs, less than your first warm up on your deadlift. So love that for disparity. I won't catch out a lat pull down very often because when it says like fucking 6 plates, I'm like, if that's 6 actual plates, that's fucking crazy. That's the 45 minutes. I'm gonna end the recording there, which we will just jump into. Don't leave the call yet. Wait.